One of the worst feelings ever is as though the world is just crushing in on you. Right? This whole idea that everything that you do, every step that you make carries the weight of the world. And when you have that feeling of the world just closing in around you, or maybe you hit a rough patch, or you miss some sales targets, or you lost some clients, and you're really beating the living snot out of yourself, I'm going to tell you right now, you can turn this around, and it's not worth it to continue to kick the crap out of yourself. The reason is that we've all made mistakes. We know what they feel like, and the cool thing about it is that you can recover. I've been there. You might be there right now, or you've been there in the past, and there are ways to avoid these things. There are ways to crawl over and succeed. So much so that this whole podcast is about how to rebuild yourself from the ground up. And when it comes down to it, rebuilding yourself, it's tough. It takes a lot of work and it takes commitment, but it also means that you need to identify what the heck the problem is in your life and own it. Meaning that if you screwed up, you got to acknowledge that that's what you did, that's who you are, and then you have the ability to erase, figure out, and rebuild from scratch. So today's episode, we're going to explore how exactly to reset yourself when things are just falling apart. You're looking around and the world is just an absolutely terrible place. You open up the news and you feel like everything is crumbling on down around you, right? I'm not talking about going ahead and changing everything you do in your life. I'm talking about transforming how you think about yourself, how you think about your work, and how you think about your customers. Because what goes on up here is the number one most important thing that controls everything else around you. We're going to use a pretty incredible story of history. As you know, I love to dive into this stuff because history is incredibly revealing. Especially this story. This story shows the power of reinventing yourself. Even when your past is so bruised and so battered that everybody's looking at you going, no. I would never go ahead and drive one of those things because of X, Y, and Z. Well, I selected this story because it is the worst of the worst. And it's also the most amazing of the amazing. It's a story about Volkswagen. It's a story about how they came to be as a car company. It's a story that's often overlooked. And even being somebody that spent a lot of time with VW, I can tell you right now, there's a couple things in here that I didn't quite even know. It completely changed the direction of how I was going to tackle this thing. It's a history that shows that you can rebuild yourself when it feels like the whole of the world is crushing down in around you. Here we go. Let's dive in. So in the aftermath of World War II, Germany was a shattered country. The people didn't select necessarily the direction that they wanted to go. What happened was that a dictator took over and kind of did what they wanted to do, right? The war itself left Europe in ruins. Germany was no exception of this. Their economy was just decimated, and pretty much any natural resource was tough to come by. The country was simply left to pick up the pieces, not just physically, but emotionally, socially, economically. They were in a bad way. You see, so among all these ruins, there was a company under the rubble. And they were used, they were abused, they were beat up and turned into a propaganda machine. The company itself was called Volkswagen. Now, a Volkswagen, they were a company that is deeply connected to the wartime effort. Now, the World War II, Germany wartime effort. This iconic car company produced this incredible, lovable vehicle called the Beetle. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but the Beetle actually has a little bit of a dark side. And sadly, it's not the greatest, but it is one of those that makes us look at it and go, whoa. Because this vehicle was designed underneath one of the worst regimes ever. You see, the leadership of Germany during World War II wanted a vehicle that could go to the masses. And because this regime caused so much immense pain and suffering across the world, Volkswagen was not left to be an exception to this rule. Actually, in the end, they were kicked to the side and buried. Well, they weren't buried for long, right? So Volkswagen's connection to the war machine left the company with a massive challenge. Nobody liked them. Right? How could it even think about recovering from one of the darkest chapters in its history if its ties were so closely related to the government at the time that was doing horrific things around the world? But the thing is this. Volkswagen did something very different. You would expect anybody that's in this situation that's like, hey, you know what? My past is my past. I'm just simply going to run away from it. right? And we see this happen with people that, for example, if you're an alcoholic, a lot of times they teach you, hey, forget it, right? That's just you, shut the door, move along, right? Anybody with addiction problems, that's a lot of times, and that's what they do. But when it comes to this, Volkswagen spined up. They stood up straight and they owned it. They didn't run from it. They didn't even erase their absolutely very dark infancy. The reason is that they couldn't control it. It was history, and history is what it is. And we have a lot to learn from it. What Volkswagen decided to do is instead of simply going ahead and wallowing in the fact that the leader of the German government at the time, and Ferdinand Porsche, got together and designed the people's car, they owned it. And by owning it means that they use it as a catalyst for transformation. They acknowledge that their past was their past. Instead of being defined by it, right, they simply just chose to redefine where they stood on the topic at hand. And that, my friends, is where all the magic happened. By going ahead and standing up and owning it, they were able to commit to making the changes that they wanted to make them better, right? So as the war ended, the factory that Volkswagen was producing Beetle out of, I would try to pronounce it, but it would be terrible, and I really don't want the emails. The Volkswagen itself was bankrupt, right? The company the reputation was tarnished, and as you can imagine, with most car companies, when they do something that's either really dumb, or they do something that is just not in line with the public, and this definitely wasn't. I mean, obviously, with the German government during World War II, people abandon them, and they run. And they will go ahead and avoid at all costs. Well, the company had a tiny little glimmer of hope. And this tiny little glimmer of light came from a very different area. This is so darn cool, right? So the British actually took control of the company, right? And began the difficult task of rebuilding Volkswagen, right? In this process, they made the key decision that changed everything. Instead of continuing to produce vehicles tied to the wartime needs, they made the bold choice to focus on creating a car specifically for the people, which initially was kind of the intent. At least Ferdinand Porsche knew that. And then eventually it turned into this tiny little, wartime car that could be made into all sorts of other little things. But the Beetle, the car itself, had once been associated with a regime or a symbol of power and control. I've seen one of these vehicles. Just the paint on them, the flat blackness of it, and how it just absorbs everything around it. It just gives you the ick, right? But these individuals from Britain realized that the people's car still had a place, right? They created a whole new message that this wasn't just a car, right? It was a car for the everyday people that could symbolize hope, practicality, and reliability. They decided to propose a complete shift in the momentum of what people thought about that little vehicle. Because during the war, if you saw one of those, you ran. But as time progressed and people started to buy these things, all of a sudden it became the vehicle that every hippie out there wanted to go ahead and get their hands on. I mean, it was like the Honda Civic of the 90s, right after Fast and the Furious came out. Everybody wanted one of these things in their driveway. And the reason was reliability, practicality, and also this idea that you can be part of something really big, right? The rebranding of the Beetle, though, when they took a stab at it, it wasn't simple. It wasn't affordable, and it wasn't one of those things that the meek today would go ahead and say, "Oh yeah, let's take a stab at it." But the vehicle itself offered up those characteristics. It was simple. It was affordable to the average person, or at least it could be made affordable, and dependability-wise, for the vehicle of its time, it was incredibly dependable, not just in the respect of it had the ability to run a long time. This is a vehicle that even in the United States, the U.S. Postal Service ran an ad about the reliability of a Volkswagen Beetle to get somebody, or to get the mail to somebody, to get the milk to somebody's door. Thing was that these things were great at driving in the snow and pretty much any crap that you can throw at it. But the car itself, it wasn't flashy and it definitely wasn't luxurious. And believe it or not, it was actually a vehicle that Ferdinand Porsche at the time when he was approached by the head of the German government, he took a vehicle that he was designing off the shelf, a luxury car, watered this thing on down and came out with the Bug. Now, the vehicle itself, it was built to serve the needs of the ordinary individual. That was the role of the car. It was meant to be inexpensive. It was meant to serve the ability for you to get around and be somewhat safe, right? And that's exactly what everybody, especially over in Germany at the time, needed. The whole world eventually got this vehicle. And up until not too long ago, I'm talking 10, 15 years ago, we still actually built this vehicle new in some countries, right? So it was a symbol of peace. It was a symbol that let people know that, hey, everything's going to be all right. Even though a short time ago, that was a vehicle that made people cringe when they saw it coming down the street, right? So this didn't happen overnight, right? The company faced massive financial struggles. There was nothing left to VW other than this factory after the war. I mean, the finances were dried up. So Britain had to front everything to get this thing back up and running. Now, the vehicle itself was similar to DeLorean and a lot of other manufacturers, since they had big dreams of resurrecting this dinosaur from World War II, well, the financial struggles came and they came big, right? There were huge production delays. The factory itself had to be brought down to like the concrete slab and rebuilt because it was so old. I mean, going ahead and trying to get into a facility that was meant to build the original Beetle, which was already bombed out, it was impossible. So the British had to rebuild all of that. But eventually, in the end, they focused on what really mattered with this car, which obviously made it much far easier to manufacture. Affordability, simplicity, and reliability was the mantra that backed this thing up. You see, these people had to be able to buy this car. And a lot of schemes during World War II by the government made it a vehicle that you could go ahead and buy one. If you're wealthy, you can have it today. If you weren't, it was going to be incredibly difficult for you to actually get this thing on your hands. It was very messed up. Let's dive a little bit deeper into this thing, right? I don't just want to leave it at that Volkswagen was rebuilt by the British. There's a lot to this story, right? The story is full of lessons that we can apply to our lives in a lot of different ways, especially when it comes to focusing on these difficult moments, right? So when the war ended in 1945, Germany, as I said, was left devastated, right? The cities were destroyed, the economy was in shambles, and the future of Germany as a whole, including their government, was just completely uncertain. Nobody knew who to trust and nobody knew where to start rebuilding. Volkswagen had been built during the 1930s to create the people's car, right? Under the leadership of, well, it starts with an end, and sadly, I would get banned on a couple of places if I even said it. So when German leadership at the time came in to have this people's car be made, well, it kind of put Volkswagen of the future at a crossroads. Because not only was the company's factory in ruins in 1945, at the same time, everybody hated them, right? By association with that regime that killed so many people. How could a company possibly come out of one of the deepest, darkest chapters of human history, even hope to recover? I mean, this is the worst of the worst of the worst. When we look at this, you can directly connect the line from the people that ran this company to well, not all, but a lot of the bad things that happened. And, I have to give the people credit that rebooted VW, is that they straight up said, that wasn't us, but this thing has some serious promise. And I think we all need to go ahead and recognize it. The car that had been designed as a symbol of the regime's strength, right, the Volkswagen Beetle, was now tarnished by association with this war effort. It wasn't just the company's physical infrastructure that was damaged. It was the very perception of the brand itself, right? The Beetle, though designed as the people's car, was now seen as an emblem of government propaganda. And how could you see it as any other way? It was directly built and made to be something that everybody could apparently afford. But if you were filling out your payment book, which they gave you if you wanted one of these things, and you missed one payment, you had to start over. You know what I call that? I call it a scam. And that's exactly what happened here to so many people is that they kicked their money on into the system. 1 month they couldn't afford it. Next thing you know, they couldn't get their car. And this was exactly how the government worked at the time. They did not care who got in their way or who they went ahead and upset. So the story, though, of Volkswagen takes a very unexpected turn, right? Despite the company's past troubles and Volkswagen, they didn't put themselves in a hole. They didn't stick their head in the sand, and they didn't cry about how much money that they lost during the war. It was what it was, and the reality was sitting right in front of them. But they found an unexpected lifeline in a place that they didn't even think that they were gonna have it. You see, in 1945, when the war ended, Germany was so divided among Allied powers, Volkswagen came under British control. The Allies, rather than shutting down the company completely, saw a lot of potential in Volkswagen's production facility and the cars itself. But the updates were massively expensive. They recognized, though, that the Beetle's potential could serve as a cornerstone here in the post-war recovery. It wasn't just Volkswagen's rebirth, though. You see, under the guidance of British officials like, Ivan Hurst, the company had a chance, right? Hurst played this major key role in reviving the company and helping restore the factory and push the Beetle into production once again. He saw the value of this thing, and he commissioned the government for the funding to pull this off, right? His belief in the car's simplicity and practicality became a massive turning point. I mean, so many of us out there have seen the magic in Ferdinand Porsche's original designs, and he obviously did too. Major Ivan Hurst was onto something. But even with the factory operational, Volkswagen faced some absolutely staggering challenges, right? The company needed materials to produce this car. They needed the steel, they needed the rubber, they needed the glass and other vital components. But these resources were just non-existent. They were just all used up and shot at other people. So where are we going to get this stuff? It was almost as though this thing was just never going to get off the ground. Major Ivan Hurst was doing absolutely everything he and his team could do to get Volkswagen what they needed to start supplying the average person with the ability to get into one of these. But then they realized that moving past the past was going to be a far bigger struggle, right? Rebuilding that physical infrastructure was obviously important. But rebuilding the faith in the people was an entirely different thing. You see, the vehicle itself, the Beetle, had to be somewhat detached from Volkswagen. And in many ways, Volkswagen did a beautiful job of taking their name and just creating a slight bit of separation for a bit. The Volkswagen Beetle had been designed to represent a vision of unity under a totalitarian regime. It was a connection to that regime that was incredibly hard for the average person to ignore. So you can rebuild that factory, but if we don't like you from the beginning, you gotta do some real hard work to change our minds and rebuild trust. So at first, the Beetle seemed like it could just be a relic of a wartime past, just another symbol of, just the Holocaust and everything terrible. But the British leadership that was running Volkswagen understood that the world needed something different. The narrative had to shift with this car. So instead of focusing on the car's cryptic past, they chose to highlight its potential to the masses and show that the car could be this reliable, affordable thing that you can trust with your family. These qualities were particularly important post-war, and the reason was everybody was struggling, right? Most people, couldn't go ahead and even get back on their feet for many years after the war came on through and ravaged this place. So the focus shifted from political propaganda to practicality. And this made all the difference in the world. You see, they went from news, gossip, to actually doing something and making that change of going, hey, we can help. We can be better than everybody else. All of a sudden, people love them. You see, this shift started to resonate with people. Affordability, reliability, simplicity. Say it over and over and over again, and next thing you know, you actually start to feel kind of good. You see, the Beetle wasn't flashy, and they knew that. Actually, the car at the time, people looked at it and laughed because it was tiny, and design was just weird compared to everything else, especially here in the United States. It didn't have any luxury features. It didn't have any extravagant finishes at all. I mean, the bouginess of this thing was like at a minimum, unless you waited it out a little while for some of those special editions. But what it did have was something that even the Americans were struggling with at the time. massive amounts of practicality. It wasn't a boat. It wasn't something that would simply just look like that you're supposed to get on in and fill it up with 30 gallons of gasoline and go 150 miles. It actually went ahead and allowed people to fill the vehicle up and get relatively good fuel efficiency and be, well, pretty reliable based on those standards of that day. So the vehicle also had a couple extra benefits to go along with it. It was inexpensive. It was easy to repair. If you were somewhat handy, you could go ahead and fix this thing. And it was crazy durable. We've seen these things as all sorts of different designs. We've seen them as dune buggies. We've seen them obviously as cars. We've seen them as little buses. I mean, there's so many variations of what you can do with a Volkswagen Beetle platform that people eventually started to realize that not only is it practical, it's inexpensive, and it can be fun, right? People recovering from the war started to appreciate the qualities that Britain was putting into this and what they were starting to bring to the table and leave behind. They saw that peace actually was something that could be relied on. So as the 1940s turned into the 1950s, Volkswagen began to make the Beetle's mark. And that road to success, it definitely wasn't smooth, right? So the factory still had, as time progressed, it still had its supply challenges. The reason is this car was hot and it was selling insanely fast, and everybody wanted to be in on this, right? So it took some time to establish a consistent production lines with this car, and eventually it started to branch out throughout the world to make it even easier to manufacture. So with this, though, the Beetle at the time was mostly available in markets like Germany and wherever you could be close to a factory. Eventually, they shrunk this thing on down, and then it exploded, right? But even though that Volkswagen had these issues, they had the issues of people not liking them simply because they came out of a government propaganda scheme, and at the same time, they had these factory issues that were just so tough to go ahead and get around. They had a solid product, and they had solid messaging. Unlike some of the companies that we talked about just recently, where they had pie in the sky kind of idea, and it became super difficult to even think about getting that car out, right? So with this, the Beetle itself started to establish a global reputation, right? It started to take that tarnished look of the brand and just gradually take it away. And it started to build up this idea that this company, this Volkswagen, that this people's car that was touted through propaganda, that from this wartime thing to this lovable item, right? So in the 1950s, Volkswagen went ahead and said, "Hey, you know what? We're gonna come to some international markets." So they decided, let's go to the United States. And when they came to the United States, the Beetle found a very different audience than what they had over in Germany. Not just people looking for affordable transportation, but also looking for something that stood out. You see, Americans like to do something very interesting with their cars. The automobile in the United States is an extension of an individual's personality. It's not just a practical thing. If you're listening to this outside of the United States, take a look at the vehicles that you drive. I'm pretty sure that you looked at it, and the look of the vehicle did take some consideration, but it wasn't the most important thing when you went to go buy your car. It came down to the practicality and will it serve you and size and, the pressing needs in other areas. Here in the United States, it's all about fun when it does come to your vehicle sometimes. So people looked at this thing, especially the younger generation, and embraced this interesting symbol of counterculture, the Volkswagen Beetle. They had the vehicle that would change the narrative here in the United States. So the young people picked this thing up and they saw it as this symbol of freedom, the symbol of individuality. And they still ride that wave today. You see, Volkswagen's strategy of focusing on what they did best and being reliable, efficient, and easy to maintain won consumers over. It completely erased that past of being developed from a government that was hell-bent on making sure that everybody was, well, not going to come out okay. You see, by the mid-1950s, the Volkswagen Beetle had become the most recognizable symbol on the planet. It also became the most loved car in the world. So as the years went on, Volkswagen's focus on quality and customer satisfaction paid off. And by the 1960s, the Beetle had become an icon, known around the world as the people's car. The company had just successfully reinvented itself. They took themselves out of the ashes, and now they were straight up flying. As the years went on, Volkswagen's focus on quality and customer satisfaction is where it paid off. This is why I hammer so much on things like needs assessment. Getting needs assessment done gives you the ability to understand where customer satisfaction needs to be applied. You see, by the 1960s, the Volkswagen had become this incredible icon, known around the world as the people's car. The company had successfully reinvented itself, not from running from its past, but by confronting it and deciding to focus on what people really needed, which was dependability, affordability, and an easy-to-use car. I mean, if you got on one of these old VW Bugs, you'd notice pretty quickly there wasn't much in the way of frills. They were very easy to use. So Volkswagen went from this symbol of this failed, terrible regime to a symbol of post-war hope and recovery. They didn't do this by simply just ignoring their troubled past. They did it by embracing the opportunity for change. When the worst is at your door and it's all right there and you're just feeling absolutely terrible, just note there is another door that you can open. You're not stuck sitting there in just the terribleness that could potentially be the rest of your life. You know, by going ahead and learning these lessons through history, we can focus on something positive, and that's the future. That's the fact that the future isn't quite written, right? I know many of us out there may go ahead and believe in something along the lines of fate or something along, those lines. And I surely do too. But the thing is that if we're here and we have to make little micro choices every single day, well, that means that we actually may be able to make some larger choices throughout our lives. So let's bring all this back to us as sales consultants here. So you might be struggling with your own version of a war-torn reputation, right? You may have something in your life or some baggage that you're carrying around, or it might just come down to the fact in sales career, you're kind of not, all about this whole, up and down pay theme. But here's the thing. If you've missed those targets, if you made mistakes with your clients, or you found yourself in that just super crappy sales slump, just like Volkswagen, you might actually be able to go ahead and pull yourself out of it, right? The weight that they were carrying around is nothing like the weight that you're carrying around. The thing is that the weight that you're carrying around is more than likely fixable. It's more than likely something that you could use to rebuild yourself. Rebuilding yourself takes a significant amount of commitment, and it's not easy. It's something that I've had to do over, the past 5 years or so here. The thing is that you have to commit to it. Volkswagen showed us here that if you don't run away from something and you simply just own it and understand what the problem is, you can make the changes that are needed to become as great as you are, right? So even when that world feels like, again, it's crushing in on you, well, that's a sign that it's time to reinvent yourself. You don't have to erase your past, ever. And I don't recommend that you do, unless you absolutely have to. But you can choose to focus on the future. The future is elusive to all of us, even if you believe that fate is the next step. Well, give you an idea. If you choose to not get out of bed, you're staying in bed. Don't know about you, but if that's your definition of choosing fate, then you just made a choice. Seriously, get out of bed. Today's a new day. Start up something new. So with this, call your clients, reconnect with them, say hello, get to know them on a human level. Because if all you've done is get to know them on a salesperson level, and you haven't spent the time to get to know who these people are, well, you're kind of leaving a lot of cash on your desk. Mainly, the customer's not going to pay out for somebody that they don't appreciate. But some things that all people tend to really connect with is the fact that you can be that person that they can depend on. You can be that person that shows that it doesn't really mean that you need to be perfect, because customers don't need perfection. They need consistency and they need trust. And if those are areas that you might be falling down in, just note that, again, a company that had the worst infancy on the planet has figured out how to go ahead and turn themselves into one of the largest manufacturing companies in the world. So you can be that consultant who turns everything around. I've seen sales consultants that are that one bad apple on the floor, and as soon as they recognize that they can fix it, they turn themselves around, and they do. But here's the thing. You gotta own it. And if you don't own it, it will never change. So look at that thing that's in your life that either you gotta keep around, you gotta eliminate, you gotta walk away from, whatever it might be. If you find that that thing is just sucking up far too much time and too much energy, change, because you can. But remember, Volkswagen didn't go from this symbol of devastation to this global icon overnight. These things aren't easy. Whether it's you simply going ahead and fixing your pay plan and getting in contact with your customers, or if it's you going out and seeking therapy. The point is that what goes on inside of your head is directly connected to the numbers that are on your paycheck. And if you can't be in a positive mindset when you're working with your customers will look at you and go, they have straight up no business working with you. So you can redefine your identity, just like VW did. It's just a matter of you taking that first step and realizing that I'm not going to run away from this thing. My past is my past. It's part of who I am, and I'm going to own it. So first, you have to acknowledge who you are, right? If you've made mistakes or things just aren't going your way, don't pretend they didn't happen, right? Don't go ahead and just lock it up in a box in the back of your brain. Trust me, it doesn't work, right? Learn from these things. Acknowledge areas that you need to improve, right? And focus on those, because that's going to be your foundation right there for transformation. If you can't make that acknowledgement that, hey, you know what, I'm a real jerk and here's why, or maybe, I'm coming off wrong to people and I'm too arrogant to make that change, right? If you recognize these and you own them, that's the first step for you going ahead and actually making a positive change in your life. Then we got to reframe some things, right? Reframe your message. Reframe who you are, right? Focus on what your customers need and not just what you're trying to sell. There's a reason in every single podcast that I say put the customer before the commission. The reason is that whenever you put the customer before the commission, they always pay more. It's a guaranteed thing. But you got to be able to do your job right. And you can't do your job right if you feel like crap every single day of your life. You have to acknowledge what that is. And then with this, listen more. This takes the reliance off of you. Because during your needs assessment, if you're sitting there running your mouth the whole time, if you're sitting there doodling, if you're sitting there just not paying attention, you're not helping yourself. Get the customer talking. Get the customer going ahead and saying, hey, here's exactly what I need, and here's how we can go ahead and actually change this thing. And then in the end, this one's the toughest of them all. And for some people, it might be the Achilles heel that makes it so you can't change. This is called patience. You have to be patient. So you see, change doesn't happen overnight. It's not like going out and going and buying a new pair of clothes and going, hey, you know what, everything's great, right? I'm a new person today. No, you actually need to break yourself down and then rebuild yourself, which is one of the reasons that I selected this episode. By seeing where you are at the bottom, right? You take VW, that was their floor. From that point, they were able to go, okay, I have a choice. I can go back to where I was, or I can start something new. And they decided, let's own it. That's what we were. That wasn't us. But it's time to start something new. And so they went ahead and they did exactly that. But that patience, the time it takes, is not overnight. So cut yourself some slack and give yourself the ability to make that consistent daily effort to be a better version of yourself. Because I know you can be it. And I know it's tough. Trust me, I've gone through it myself. And I'm continually working on it on the daily. But similarly, you won't see these instant results. It takes a long time, but it takes that consistency, that ability for your customers to understand, hey, I'm working on myself and I'm going to provide you as much value as I possibly can. Because that's not what I used to do in the past. When it comes to the past, it was all about writing deals. It was all about speeding through these things and trying to go ahead and make sure that I could get a paycheck. But as soon as I slowed down and realized, hey, I could offer up the customer far more value, I could offer up the customer the ability to understand what they're about to do. Once that happened, all of a sudden I started to see, hey, you know what? I might be selling maybe a car or two less a month, but those grosses went up a lot, right? So also over time, once I started to figure out how to get those conversations rolling, the sales started going up too, right? So the gross comes first, right? Once you start to put the customer before the paycheck, and then once that happens, all of a sudden more people want to work with you because they realize that you're a decent person. You help their buddy out, and now their buddy's more than willing to send people on in for you, right? If you ever wonder why you don't get your referrals, that maybe because your customer didn't like you enough when you worked the deal last time. So you have the ability, if you have the will, to rebuild your whole reputation all the way through. And you have the ability to restart. If anybody ever tells you that, hey, first impression, that's it, no, go away with that crap. Because your first impression is only for that conversation. You can always go ahead and reintroduce yourself and reinvent yourself. And people accept you better for that. So remember, no matter how deep your struggle is right now, you can change, just like Volkswagen did, right? You can redefine yourself. And when it comes down to what success looks like, look at their sales numbers. They do pretty darn good. I mean, I pick on them from time to time, but it's all in good fun. What they've been doing is absolutely amazing. And even still to this day, you'll see even in their marketing, they still try to go ahead and create this idea of happiness and unity. Because with their focus on things like empathy, on things like simplicity and reliability, not only did it make their consultants' jobs easier, but it made it better for the customer when they came in because they were able to instantly relate to the messaging that the consultant was saying. But you'll find that once you have these three tenets in place of empathy, simplicity, reliability, transformation isn't just something that's going to be possible. It's going to be inevitable. It's going to come along. Because if empathy wasn't one of your things, let's say you only cared about yourself and you didn't give two craps about the customer, customers pick up on that. They build up the value during negotiation. If it comes down to lack of simplicity during your presentations, it's because you're showing stuff that the customer probably isn't even interested in the first place. Get back to needs assessment. When it comes to reliability, are you that person that if somebody calls, you're going to actually be able to call them back or email them back and be a useful resource? These are all things you got to consider. Because as soon as empathy, simplicity, and reliability are put into place, and you start tuning each one of those up, your whole life starts to change. So thanks for tuning in today. If you are trying to reset, I do have an episode called The Great Reset, which I talk about how we have to give ourselves permission every so often to simply hit the reset button on pretty much everything. And it's not hard to do. It's just a focused change of being able to understand that that customer is worth far more than what we usually give them credit for. So keep going. You got this. I got faith in you. Also, if you could please, subscribe to the podcast. Wouldn't kill you. Give it a quick little share on social media and maybe leave me a comment if you found something on here was pretty awesome. Aside from that, have a great day. Go out there, crush it, sell, spread the love, spread the kindness, and I will talk to you next week.